Before you hear what I'm about to tell you, I need you to understand something. The most dangerous people in your life are rarely the ones you don't trust. They're the ones you trust completely, without question, the way you trust the floor to hold your weight when you step out of bed in the morning. You never think about it. You just step. That's what made what happened to me so hard to see coming, and so much harder to accept once I saw it clearly. I want you to ask yourself something as you listen. Not what you would have done. Ask yourself whether you would have even noticed. My name is Marcus. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a building inspector for the city of Birmingham, Alabama, and the last 2 years of that career I spent looking forward to the day I could stop. I retired on a Thursday in March. My wife Carol threw a small dinner. Her son came. He brought a gift. That gift is the reason I'm telling you this story. I want you to picture the kitchen table where all of this started to unravel. Not the conference room where it ended, not the detective's office where I first understood the full shape of what was happening to me. The kitchen table, Carol's good tablecloth, the blue one she only puts out for company, a box wrapped in silver paper sitting next to a slice of yellow cake I hadn't touched yet, my stepson standing across from me, smiling the way he always smiled, wide and easy, like a man with nothing to hide. He said, "Dad, you're going to love this." I didn't correct him on the word. I never did. To understand why, I have to go back a little further. Carol and I married 11 years ago. She was a widow. Her first husband passed from a cardiac event when her son was 19. I came into his life as a grown man arriving at a house that was already fully built, already furnished. He was polite to me from the beginning. Not warm, but polite. Over the years that shifted, or I thought it did. By the time I retired, he was calling me Dad, coming over for Sunday dinners, asking about my health with what felt like genuine concern. I let myself believe the architecture of our relationship had finally settled into something solid. What I didn't know was that some structures look sound from the outside, while everything underneath is quietly giving way. The gift was a tablet, one of the newer ones, thin as a magazine, with a bright screen and a smart assistant already configured. He'd set it up for me. He set it up for me, he said. Download the apps I'd need, connected it to the home Wi-Fi, made it simple. He walked me through it at the table while Carol refilled her wine glass and laughed at something on television in the other room. He showed me how to read the news, how to video call, how to check my pension statements without driving to the bank. No more squinting at that old laptop, he said. I thanked him. I meant it. It was a good gift. I used it every morning after that. Coffee, tablet, the back porch, it became a routine. The news, the weather, the occasional crossword. Simple things that filled the quiet hours retirement leaves behind. I'm not a man who slows down well. 31 years of walking job sites had left me with the kind of restlessness that doesn't know what to do with a comfortable chair. The tablet helped. It gave my hands something to hold, and my mind something to follow. I didn't notice anything wrong for almost 3 weeks. The first sign came from my old supervisor, Pete Garland. Pete had retired 2 years before me, and we stayed in touch the way men our age stay in touch, insistently but genuinely, calls that were weeks apart but always felt like no time had passed. He stopped by the house on a Wednesday afternoon to drop off a set of socket wrenches he'd borrowed the previous fall. We ended up sitting on the porch for 2 hours. At some point, I mentioned the tablet, showed it to him. He turned it over in his hands the way Dennis turned those earbuds over in that other story I've heard too many times since, slowly, without expression, reading something invisible on the surface. He asked who set it up. My stepson, I told him. Pete spent 30 years in city infrastructure before he spent 5 in IT consulting afterward, a second career he'd stumbled into because he couldn't sit still either. He understood systems the way I understood load-bearing walls. He knew what should and shouldn't be there. He asked if he could look at it for a day. I said sure. I figured he wanted to show me something, some app or setting I'd been missing. He came back the next morning with the tablet and a look on his face I recognized. It was the same look I used to carry to conversations with building owners when I found something in their foundation that they weren't going to want to hear about. He set the tablet on the table between us and placed his hand flat on top of it. "Marcus," he said, "this thing has been watching you." I sat back in my chair. I heard the words. I didn't process them right away, the way you hear thunder before you connect it to lightning. He explained it carefully. A remote access application, not visible in the standard app drawer, installed during initial setup. The kind of software that could be operated from anywhere with a Wi-Fi connection. It had access to the camera, the microphone, the location data, the screen. Everything I'd typed, everything I'd said in its presence, every financial website I'd visited, every account I'd logged into on that bright, clean screen he'd handed me with a smile. For 3 weeks, someone had a window into my living room, my back porch, my kitchen table. My hands went cold. Pete told me to go to the police before I told anyone else. Anyone, he said, and he held my gaze long enough that I understood he was including Carol in that word. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark next to my wife of 11 years, listening to her breathe, and I did the arithmetic of everything I had said in front of that tablet. I'd called my insurance agent while sitting on the porch with it, on the table beside me. I'd talked to my financial advisor on speakerphone about rolling my pension into a managed account. I'd told Carol one evening while we sat in the kitchen that I'd finally decided to name her the primary beneficiary on everything, that it was the right thing to do at our age, that I wanted her taken care of. I'd said all of that within 10 feet of a microphone that was transmitting to somewhere I couldn't see. The next morning, I left the tablet on the kitchen counter, face up, and drove to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department on my lunch break from absolutely nothing, because I was retired, and every hour was a lunch break now. The waiting room had plastic chairs bolted to the floor, and a water cooler with an empty jug that no one had replaced. A deputy named Ellis came out and listened to me with the particular patience of someone who has heard many things he cannot immediately act upon. He took the tablet. He told me not to discuss the matter with anyone in the household until they had a chance to look at it. He told me to act normally. I drove home. Normal was the hardest word I'd ever been given. That afternoon, my stepson called to ask how I was enjoying the tablet. I told him I'd left it charging inside. He asked about my health, about whether I was keeping up with my blood pressure medication, about whether Carol and I had given any more thought to estate planning. He said it casually, the way you ask about the weather, but the questions landed differently now. They felt like inventory, like someone checking on an investment. I said everything was fine. After I hung up, I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time. I thought about the years I'd spent walking other people's properties, looking at what they'd built, finding the places where shortcuts had been taken, where inspections had been skipped, where what looked solid from the street was actually failing from within. I'd always trusted my instincts in those moments. The floor that gave slightly underfoot, the wall that sounded hollow when you knocked. Something wasn't right. You didn't ignore that feeling in this work. I hadn't been applying the same instincts to my own house. Deputy Ellis called me back 2 days later. He'd brought in someone from a cybercrime unit. The application on the tablet was not commercially available. It had been compiled specifically. Whoever installed it knew what they were doing, or had paid someone who did. The access logs showed that the application had been active, transmitting data in compressed audio packets to an external server every single day since the night of my retirement dinner. Ellis asked me if I knew who might have motivation. I told him I had a theory I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. He told me the same thing Detective Harris had once told someone else in a story that rhymed uncomfortably with mine. Don't confront anyone. Document everything. Let people show you who they are. I started paying attention differently. My stepson visited that Sunday, as he often did. I watched him the way I used to watch a building, looking for stress fractures instead of smiling at the facade. He brought Carol flowers and spent 20 minutes in the kitchen with her before finding me on the back porch. He sat down across from me and asked if I'd thought any more about getting my documents in order. I asked him what he meant. He said, "You know, power of attorney, that kind of thing. In case something happens, Carol worries." I looked at Carol through the glass door. She was arranging the flowers. She wasn't looking at us. I said I hadn't thought about it much. He nodded, easy, unhurried. There's no rush, he said. I just want to make sure you're both protected. Both. The word sat between us on the porch railing like something he'd put there on purpose. I said I appreciated it. That night I went down to my home office on the pretext of looking for an old tax return. I kept my files the way I'd kept my inspection records, organized, dated, consistent. While I was down there, I went through the filing cabinet the way you go through a building you're no longer certain you understand. I was looking for something out of place. I found it in the back of the third drawer, a manila envelope, unsealed, newer than everything around it. Inside were printouts, a draft document bearing the heading of a notary service I didn't recognize, with my name and Carol's name and my stepson's name arranged in a way that made my vision go slightly sideways. A form authorizing financial decision-making on my behalf in the event of diminished capacity or extended incapacity. My stepson as the appointed agent, Carol listed as a secondary cosigner, as if her signature had already been considered a formality. There were handwritten notes in the margins. My stepson's handwriting, sharp, efficient, the same hand that had written the card tucked into my retirement gift. The notes said things like blood pressure medication, forgetfulness, and ask Carol about the episode last fall and retirement disorientation. Document the episode last fall. I sat very still on the basement steps. Last October I'd had a brief dizzy spell, nothing serious. My doctor had attributed it to dehydration and a blood pressure adjustment. Carol had been worried. I told her not to be. She must have mentioned it to her son, and her son had written it down. I sat there for a long time. This wasn't about the tablet. The tablet was just a tool. This was about building a case, a quiet, paperwork-based case that I was declining, that I was forgetting things, that I was not fully capable of managing my own affairs. The tablet gave him evidence. The documents gave him leverage. And somewhere in the middle of all of that was a plan to step into the space where I stood. I was 63 years old. I'd spent 3 decades making sure other people's buildings were safe to live in. I had not thought to inspect my own life with the same rigor. I called Pete from the driveway that night. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You need a lawyer before you need anything else." The next morning I called an attorney who specialized in elder law. Her name was Fitzgerald. She had an office on 20th Street with 2 comfortable chairs and a window that looked onto a parking deck. She listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly and said, "This is more common than you'd like to know." She told me what I needed to do. Secure my documents. Change passwords on every financial account, every insurance portal, every retirement platform. Contact my pension administrator and remove any third-party authorization that had been added, or that someone might try to add. Place a credit freeze. Inform my bank in writing that no one had authorization to discuss my accounts on my behalf, and keep every piece of evidence I had found, photographed, dated, and stored somewhere outside my home. I spent 3 days doing exactly that. I did it methodically, the way I used to work a job site, room by room, system by system, not rushing, not skipping steps. Carol noticed I was spending more time in the office. I told her I was getting my affairs in order. She smiled. "Good," she said. "That's so responsible." The word landed strangely. On the 4th day, my stepson called and asked if I'd given any more thought to the power of attorney paperwork. He mentioned a specific notary service, the same one whose name was on the draft documents I'd found in my basement. He said he could schedule something for the following week if I was ready. He said it so smoothly, so practiced, that I understood he had rehearsed this conversation more than once. I said I needed a little more time. He said, "Of course. No pressure." I forwarded everything to Detective Ellis that afternoon. The draft documents, photographs of the handwritten notes, a timeline I'd constructed of every suspicious conversation, every leading question, every visit that now looked different in hindsight. Ellis brought in a financial crimes investigator named Daniels. Daniels was younger, quieter, the kind of person who listened to everything and said very little until she had decided what to do with it. She listened. She said, "We're going to need to wait for him to make a direct move." I understood the logic. Understanding it didn't make the waiting any easier. I kept my routine. Coffee on the back porch. Tablet inside now. Turned off. Placed on the kitchen counter like a closed book I was no longer reading. I walked the neighborhood in the mornings. I called Pete most evenings. Pete had started keeping his own notes on everything I told him, dates and times and specific words that had been used, because Pete understood that in situations like this, documentation was the armor you didn't know you'd needed until the moment you were grateful you had it. People our age get dismissed, he told me one evening. Anyone who decides you can't manage your own life is counting on you not being able to prove otherwise. Paper is the answer to that. My stepson came by twice more in the following 2 weeks. Each time he brought something, once a casserole, once a bottle of wine. Each time he found a natural opening in the conversation to ask about my health, about my memory, about whether I was finding retirement stressful. He mentioned once in passing that he'd spoken with Carol's sister about how their mother had struggled in her later years and how important it was to have plans in place early. Carol's mother had been fine until she was 89. The night before everything came to a head, I sat in the living room after Carol had gone to bed. The house was quiet in the specific way that houses get quiet late at night, the refrigerator cycling, the old wood settling. I thought about 31 years of walking into strangers' buildings and telling them the truth about what I found, even when they didn't want to hear it. Even when the news was expensive and inconvenient and nothing like what they'd hoped. I had never been gentle about bad news because gentle had always seemed less respectful than honest. A bad foundation is a bad foundation. You don't soften that. I had been soft with myself. I had mistaken politeness for relationship. I had confused the word dad with the thing it was supposed to mean. The next morning, Investigator Daniels called. She had received an email from my stepson to my bank, sent using an email address that approximated mine closely enough to look casual on a quick read. The email had requested information about adding an authorized agent to my accounts, citing a recent medical consultation and a desire to simplify management during the transition to retirement. It had included a scanned form with what appeared to be my signature. I had not signed any form. I had not been to any medical consultation. Daniels said, "That's the move we were waiting for." The meeting at the bank was arranged through the fraud department, not by my stepson, though he didn't know that yet. He received an email, generated by the bank at Daniels's request, stating that an in-person review was required before any account modifications could be processed, and that all relevant parties should attend. He arrived in a collared shirt and dress pants, carrying a leather portfolio. Carol was already there. She'd come with me, still uncertain what the meeting was about, only knowing I'd asked her to be there and that it was important. She sat beside me and kept glancing at her son the way she always glanced at him, with a small, reflexive pride that I had spent 11 years watching and never begrudging. The bank's fraud manager introduced himself. Daniels was there, off to one side, notepad in her lap, expression giving nothing away. The fraud manager set a folder on the table and asked my stepson to confirm that he had initiated contact with the bank on my behalf. My stepson said that was correct. He said he had my full knowledge and support. The fraud manager turned to me. "Mr. Webb, is that accurate?" I said it was not. My stepson looked at me. For a fraction of a second, something passed across his face that was not anger, and not surprise, but something closer to recalibration. Then he smiled. He said there must have been a misunderstanding, that he had only been trying to help, that given my health situation, given the difficulties of the transition, he thought it would be beneficial. Daniels placed the printout on the table. The email with the forged signature, my stepson's name in the sender field barely disguised. He looked at it for a long moment. Then Daniels placed the photograph of the draft power of attorney documents beside it, the handwritten margin notes, the notary service letterhead. Carol made a sound I had not heard her make before. Not quite a word, something smaller than that. My stepson said, "Mom, I was protecting you, both of you." She looked at the notes in his handwriting, the words blood pressure, forgetfulness, episode. She looked at them for a long time. "That's not protecting him." she said quietly. He tried a different approach then. He talked about stress, about debt, about how watching a parent age was difficult, about how he had only been preparing for the inevitable, about how no one appreciated how much pressure he had been carrying on their behalf. The words came quickly, too quickly, the kind of speed that fills space rather than answering anything. Daniels waited until he stopped. Then she told him, without raising her voice, that he had used a falsified signature on a document submitted to a financial institution, that he had installed covert surveillance software on a device gifted under false pretenses, and that he had drafted legal documents intended to remove decision-making authority from a competent adult without his knowledge or consent. She told him that the matter was being referred for criminal investigation. She told him that any further contact with my financial institutions would be treated as interference. He turned to me. For the first time since I'd known him, the ease was entirely gone from his face. He said, "I'm still your son." I looked at him for a moment. The portfolio on the table, the colored shirt, the years of Sunday dinners and handshakes, and a single word I had never corrected because it seemed unkind. I said you were. He left without the portfolio. Carol didn't speak in the car. She stared at the window the whole drive home, watching Birmingham pass like she was seeing it from a distance she hadn't expected to be standing at. When we got inside, she sat at the kitchen table and pressed both hands flat against the surface, the way Pete had pressed his hand flat on that tablet, and I understood she was steadying herself against something that couldn't be steadied against. She said, "I didn't know." I sat down across from her. I said, "I know that." She said, "I talked to him about your health, about the dizzy spell. I was worried and I mentioned it, and I didn't." She stopped. "I didn't know what he was writing down." I said, "I know." She cried the way people cry when they're not angry at someone else, but at themselves, quietly, without asking for comfort. I didn't reach across the table right away. I let it be what it was. Some moments need the space they take up. You can't shorten them without losing something they carry. That was 6 months ago now. The investigation is ongoing. I was told not to expect quick resolution, and I was given no promises, which I appreciated. I had spent enough years in a professional capacity delivering news without dressing it up to know that honesty without guarantees is still a form of respect. I changed everything Fitzgerald told me to change. Every password, every beneficiary designation, every account that had ever been accessed from that tablet. I had the tablet examined by the cybercrime unit, and they confirmed what Pete had found. I did not buy another wireless device I hadn't set up myself. Carol and I are still together. That's the question I know some of you are going to want answered. We are still together because I decided that a person who was deceived is not the same as a person who deceived, and because 11 years of mornings are not nothing, even when something at the edge of them turned out to be something I hadn't agreed to live next to. We don't talk about her son directly, not yet. That conversation is still coming, the way weather comes when it's ready, and not before. Pete came by last week. We sat on the back porch the way we always have. He brought coffee from the place on Claremont that he knows I prefer. We talked about the Braves, about his granddaughter who had just started walking, about the building on 3rd Avenue that the city had finally condemned after 10 years of my reports recommending exactly that. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was getting there. He nodded. He understood what that meant, the same way he understood load-bearing walls and compromised foundations. Getting there is not arrived, but it's movement in the right direction, and movement is enough. There's something I need to say to you directly before I finish, because this isn't a story I'm telling for the sake of a story. If you are 55 or 60 or 70 years old and someone in your life has started asking about your health more than usual, asking about your finances, asking about your plans, asking gently and repeatedly in ways that feel like care but leave you with a faint unease you can't quite name, I want you to pay attention to that feeling. Trust it. Your instincts are not failing you. They are doing exactly what they were built to do. Here is what I learned, and what Fitzgerald told me in plain language that I want to pass along to you. Get your estate documents in order through your own attorney, not someone's recommendation. Name your own beneficiaries in writing, in multiple places, and tell your financial institutions directly that no one speaks for you without written, witnessed authorization. Place a credit freeze if you have any uncertainty, and for the love of everything, know what is installed on every device in your home. If someone gives you a phone or a tablet or a speaker as a gift, have someone you trust and who understands technology. Check it before you put it in your living room. Your name is not a formality. Your signature is not a convenience for someone else's use. Your mind is your own until the day it isn't, and that day is not today, and it is not for someone with a leather portfolio and a practiced smile to decide. The tablet is gone. I bought myself a simple one at the electronics store on a Sunday afternoon, paid for it with cash, set it up myself in the parking lot before I drove home, the way a man who has learned something hard does things differently afterward. It's not elegant. The settings menu took me 45 minutes, but every application on it I put there myself, and every morning when I carry it out to the back porch with my coffee, I know exactly what it is and what it isn't. That feels like something. Maybe it's small, but at 63, with 31 years of checking other people's foundations behind me, I have learned that the things you build carefully hold longer than the things that look finished before they're ready. Protect your house. Protect your name. Protect the right to speak for yourself. Those things are worth more than anyone else's plan for your future. Thank you for listening. If this story reminded you of someone, a parent, a neighbor, a friend who might not know what to look for, share it with them. These situations survive in silence. They don't hold up in the light. This is Voices of Uncle Walter. I'll see you next time.